The Old West is famous for its saloons, whiskey shots, and rowdy cowboys. But did you know that the roots of America's nationwide prohibition movement stretch back to this very era? Long before the 1920s made booze illegal, early battles over alcohol shaped the culture, laws, and daily lives of frontier towns. From temperance crusades to secret speakeasies, Prohibition's story is woven deep into the fabric of the American West, and it's full of surprising twists you won't want to miss. If you love uncovering the real stories behind America's Wild West, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating facts and legends that bring history to life. The reign of tears is over. The slums will soon be a memory. We will turn our prisons into factories and our jails into storehouses and corn cribs. Men will walk upright now, women will smile, and children will laugh. Hell will be forever for rent. Reverend Billy Sunday, speaking at the dawn of Prohibition. Prohibition in the United States was a nationwide constitutional amendment that prohibited the manufacture, importation, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages. This law was in effect from 1920 until its repeal in 1933. As America transitioned into the 20th century, the age of the Old West was fading. Railroads had largely replaced stagecoaches, cities were expanding and bringing new cultural influences to the Western frontier, and many of the once infamous outlaws were either imprisoned or had passed away. Wyatt Earp, one of the legendary lawmen of that era, had retired and was sharing his stories with authors and early filmmakers in Hollywood. During this period of change, a growing movement in the eastern United States was gaining momentum, one focused on limiting or ending alcohol consumption. Supporters of this movement often linked alcohol to poverty, crime, corruption, social difficulties, and economic burdens on society. The temperance and prohibition advocates viewed alcohol as a root cause of many societal problems. Saloons in particular were often criticized by these reformers as centers of moral decay, a criticism that, in many cases, reflected the reality of the social challenges linked to alcohol consumption at the time. The temperance movement began in the 1830s, initially promoting moderation rather than complete abstinence. Early advocates encouraged limiting the consumption of beer and wine, while advising against the use of stronger spirits like hard liquor. In 1851, Maine became the first state to ban the manufacture and sale of alcoholic beverages. Within just a few years, by 1855, nearly half of the states at that time, 13 out of 31, had passed similar restrictions. During the Prohibition era, some companies adapted to the new laws to survive. For example, Pabst Brewing shifted its production to items such as cheese, soft drinks, and malt extract. When Prohibition ended, Pabst sold its cheese business to Kraft and returned to brewing beer, famously decorating their bottles with blue silk ribbons once again. After the Civil War, many soldiers who had encountered alcohol during their service did not support the temperance movement. For the following 2 decades, the movement struggled to gain traction. In fact, saloons grew in popularity among returning veterans and other men moving westward seeking new opportunities. Across the frontier, especially in mining camps and newly established towns, saloons multiplied rapidly. These places served as key social hubs for miners, ranchers, and settlers, especially since men far outnumbered women in these areas. Saloons often became the primary source of recreation and social life in what was largely a male-dominated environment. The perspective on saloons began to shift as more women moved west. Excluded from many of these drinking establishments, women viewed them as centers of moral concern. They saw saloons not only as places of drinking, but also as venues for gambling, dancing, tobacco use, and other activities they considered inappropriate. By the 1880s, women became politically engaged for the first time in many Western communities. Their activism helped revive and strengthen the temperance cause, sparking renewed efforts to reform alcohol laws and public attitudes toward saloons. About 10 years later, the temperance movement's focus shifted from advocating moderation to calling for complete prohibition. Many of its supporters held positions in politics and on school boards, where they introduced young students to educational materials warning against the dangers of alcohol. Primarily backed by the middle class and women who had long been excluded from saloon culture, the movement gained widespread national attention as the 20th century approached. Convinced that alcohol was the root cause of moral decline in America, organizations like the Anti-Saloon League and the Women's Christian Temperance Union became increasingly visible. They organized public demonstrations, sometimes bringing city streets to a standstill, demanding the closure of saloons. Within a few years, these efforts evolved into a significant political force. Large numbers of voters called on government officials to take a firm moral stance against alcohol. One early impact of the movement was the imposition of costly licensing fees for taverns and the refusal to issue new liquor permits in many jurisdictions. Additionally, several cities enacted regulations requiring bars to concentrate in specific districts, often away from residential neighborhoods and prominent business areas. Some municipalities also eliminated practices like free lunch offerings at saloons and banned amenities, such as mustache towels, which had been common fixtures. As the temperance movement gained strength and regulations became more restrictive, the traditional saloon experienced a steady decline in the years leading up to nationwide prohibition. By 1916, a total of 21 states had enacted laws banning saloons. In the national elections that year, candidates who supported prohibition were elected to Congress in numbers twice as large as those who opposed such measures. With the country deeply involved in World War I, most Americans supported the Prohibition Amendment. Many saw it as unpatriotic to use valuable grain resources to produce alcohol during a time of war. Additionally, the fact that many major brewers and distillers were of German descent increased public support for the movement. Business leaders also believed that limiting alcohol consumption would lead to a more efficient and reliable workforce. Industrialist John D. Rockefeller contributed over $350,000 to the Anti-Saloon League, while Henry Ford famously stated, "The country couldn't run without prohibition. That is the industrial fact." On December 18, 1917, Congress passed the 18th Amendment, which prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors. This amendment was then sent to the states for ratification. Referred to as the Noble Experiment by Herbert Hoover, the amendment received approval from 75% of the states and was officially ratified on January 16, 1919. To enforce the new law, Congress passed the Volstead Act in 1920. This legislation had a significant impact on the nation's brewing industry, forcing the closure of major breweries in cities such as St. Louis, Milwaukee, and Chicago. While these closures had a considerable economic impact, Prohibition supporters celebrated early victories. Arrests related to drunkenness decreased, and medical reports showed a reduction in alcohol-related health issues. However, one of the immediate consequences of the amendment was the loss of thousands of jobs, affecting brewery workers, bartenders, and even grape growers in regions like California. Available statistics showed that overall alcohol consumption declined during Prohibition. However, this drop had already been underway for several years before the law took effect. Many observers believed that the continuing decrease had less to do with legal restrictions and more to do with the high prices charged for illegal liquor. Prohibition found some success in more rural parts of the country, where enforcement was often stricter and social norms more supportive. But in urban areas, alcohol remained readily accessible. After the end of World War I, the national mood shifted, and the demand for alcoholic beverages quickly rebounded. A new underground economy began to take shape, driven by those who saw the opportunity for profit by supplying alcohol in defiance of the law. Bootleggers, who trafficked illicit drinks in speakeasies, which served them, began appearing in large numbers. Before the 18th Amendment, alcohol consumption among women was relatively limited, often just the occasional glass of wine or sherry. But within 6 months of prohibition becoming law in 1920, women won the right to vote. This political empowerment coincided with changing cultural attitudes. Many women began to adopt more modern lifestyles, stepping away from older social conventions. The arrival of the Jazz Age marked a broader shift in public behavior and fashion. A new figure emerged, the flapper, who challenged traditional norms. With short hair, stylish dresses, and bold makeup, these young women began frequenting speakeasies, drinking cocktails, dancing, and openly embracing a new kind of social freedom. Jazz musicians such as Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Bojangles Robinson, and Ethel Waters provided the soundtrack for this transformation. For many, the excitement of nightlife and the energy of jazz culture represented liberation. For others, it signaled a breakdown of traditional values. Critics blame both prohibition and jazz music for what they saw as declining moral standards, particularly among the youth. As demand for illegal alcohol grew, supplying it required significant coordination. This led to the development of organized networks that controlled production and distribution. Figures like Al Capone in Chicago, the Purple Gang in Detroit, and Lucky Luciano in New York became prominent within this landscape. Organized crime groups operated many of the speakeasies, from lavish nightclubs to hidden basement bars. These underground establishments became central to the social lives of many Americans during the 1920s, illustrating both the challenges of enforcing prohibition and the unintended cultural shifts it helped inspire. Despite regular federal raids, law enforcement agencies struggled to keep pace with the widespread defiance of prohibition. Many club owners were well prepared, installing early warning systems, hidden compartments, and cleverly designed furniture to conceal alcohol. Some venues disguised their true nature entirely, while others made no effort to hide their activities at all. In fact, bribery became so common that some clubs openly sold liquor with little fear of consequence. Payments to police officers and federal agents were often factored into operating costs, contributing to widespread political and institutional corruption. As enforcement efforts faltered, organized crime stepped in to take control of the lucrative illegal alcohol market. These networks managed production, distribution, and protection, often leading to disputes over territory. One of the most widely publicized events of the era was the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago, in which 7 men were killed. The event was widely attributed to Al Capone's gang, though exact responsibility remains debated. This incident, while infamous, was part of a broader pattern. By the late 1920s, Chicago was reporting as many as 400 organized crime-related deaths annually. And Chicago was not alone. Many cities across the United States experienced a sharp rise in criminal activity related to the illegal alcohol trade. Bootleggers became increasingly resourceful. Smugglers used boats to bring alcohol from Canada and Mexico, landing on U.S. shores where enforcement was often thin. Liquor was hidden in everything, from produce crates and coconut shells to garden hoses. Creative concealment was essential for moving products safely inland. While many breweries shut down due to the alcohol ban, others shifted production to near beer, which contained less than 0.5% alcohol and was technically legal. However, it was widely known that some of these breweries quietly continued to make full-strength beer. California's grape growers also adapted quickly. Rather than producing wine directly, they developed a grape concentrate called Vine Glow. Packaging often included a humorous warning about what not to do with the juice, because doing so would cause it to ferment into wine. Between 1919 and 1926, grape-growing land in California increased nearly 7-fold, largely due to this clever workaround. On an individual level, Americans found many discreet ways to carry alcohol. Hip flasks, hollowed-out walking canes, water bottles, and even fake books became popular tools for concealment. At the same time, medicinal alcohol remained legal, which led to a surge in sales of tonics, elixirs, and patent medicines. Many of these were thinly disguised methods for legal alcohol consumption. Prohibition, intended to create a more orderly and sober society, instead pushed many ordinary citizens into breaking the law. People who had never before considered themselves criminals found themselves participating in an underground economy simply to enjoy a drink. Prohibition supporters faced another major challenge when they lost influence over where and how alcohol was consumed. Prior to the ban, local governments could regulate alcohol sales through ordinances, restricting them on Sundays, during elections, or in certain neighborhoods. But once Prohibition began, underground speakeasies appeared in virtually every corner of American cities and towns, operating freely without limitations on hours or locations. At the same time, national crime trends began to shift. After years of decline in serious crimes like homicide, burglary, and assault during the early 1900s, these rates began to climb again throughout the Prohibition era. Additionally, the number of people incarcerated for alcohol-related offenses rose dramatically, leading to overcrowded prisons across the country. Public concern grew as headlines regularly reported crime and corruption linked to the illicit alcohol trade. Many Americans began to associate the unintended consequences, rising crime, overwhelmed courts, and political dishonesty, with the prohibition laws themselves. Enforcement responsibility was placed under the U.S. Treasury Department, but the agents assigned to uphold the Volstead Act were often poorly trained, underfunded, and lacked widespread public support. These limitations made effective enforcement nearly impossible. As the economic hardships of the Great Depression intensified in the early 1930s, the conversation around prohibition began to change. With so many Americans unemployed, there was a growing push to legalize alcohol again, not just for personal freedom, but as a way to create jobs and generate tax revenue through the reopening of breweries, distilleries, and taverns. Even President Herbert Hoover, once a firm supporter of the 18th Amendment, came to acknowledge its shortcomings. By the 1932 election, both Hoover and his opponent, Franklin D. Roosevelt, expressed support for ending prohibition. After winning the presidency, Roosevelt acted swiftly. On December 5, 1933, the ratification of the 21st Amendment officially repealed the 18th, bringing an end to what many had dubbed the noble experiment. With it came a new chapter for American industry, law enforcement, and public life. After the repeal of Prohibition in 1933, the American drinking landscape underwent a cultural shift. The once common term saloon quickly fell out of favor. It had become closely associated with the rowdy and unregulated drinking culture of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, something the public was eager to leave behind. As new legal drinking establishments began to open across the country, they adopted different names, branding themselves as cocktail lounges, bars, or taverns. These terms conveyed a more refined and socially acceptable image that aligned with the evolving tastes of modern America. This rebranding reflected not just a change in language, but a transformation in how alcohol was consumed and perceived in society. With the decline of traditional saloons, public drinking began to lose its strong association with male-only spaces. As a result, it became more socially acceptable for women to consume alcohol in the semi-private atmosphere of speakeasies. This cultural change did not go unnoticed by those in the alcohol trade. Marketers and bootleggers quickly recognized women as an important and previously untapped customer base. Some women even entered the illegal liquor business themselves, often facing less suspicion from law enforcement than their male counterparts. Before Prohibition, women who drank in public, particularly outside of large cities like New York or Chicago, were often judged harshly and associated with poor moral character. In rural and conservative areas, such behavior was especially stigmatized. During Prohibition, people with alcohol dependency faced a particularly difficult situation. While those determined to obtain alcohol usually could, individuals who wished to stop drinking often had few resources. Many self-help organizations that once supported recovery efforts had dissolved during the dry years. It wasn't until 1935, 2 years after Prohibition ended, that a new approach to recovery emerged with the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. The group offered a peer-supported method that would grow significantly in the decades that followed. Prohibition also left a lasting imprint on American music, especially jazz. As speakeasies flourished, so did the demand for live entertainment. Jazz, already well-rooted in New Orleans, spread rapidly to northern cities like Chicago and New York, carried by musicians and migrants affected by the Great Depression. Different urban centers began to develop their own distinct jazz styles, thanks in part to new recording technology and a broader audience. The genre's popularity soared, becoming a central feature of the nightlife in speakeasies across the country. Jazz also played a unique role in fostering early moments of racial integration. Although audiences were often segregated, the music brought together predominantly black performers and largely white patrons, reflecting a slow but meaningful cultural shift. Moonshining had long been part of life in the American South well before Prohibition. The practice continued through the dry years and even flourished afterward. By the 1950s, the tradition gave rise to a new cultural phenomenon: muscle cars. These powerful vehicles were used by moonshiners to outrun law enforcement on winding back roads, many of which earned the nickname Thunder Road. The legacy of this era was captured in popular culture through songs and films, most notably Thunder Road, which celebrated the daring drivers, high-speed cars, and hidden routes that became part of Southern folklore. Prohibition also had lasting effects on the structure of the alcohol industry. Prior to the nationwide ban, alcohol production had become increasingly industrialized and efficient. Large breweries and distilleries operated on a commercial scale, distributing to licensed taverns and retail outlets. However, with the implementation of Prohibition, this infrastructure was largely dismantled. Many major producers were forced to shut down, and the responsibility for alcohol manufacturing shifted to individuals operating outside the law. This change marked a return to small-scale, often inefficient production methods, moving away from the streamlined systems of mass distribution that had previously defined the industry. The closure of these production facilities and public establishments also had economic consequences. Jobs were lost across various sectors, from factory workers and bartenders to suppliers and transporters, leading to a decline in one of the country's once thriving industries. Initially, some brewers hoped they could continue operations by producing beverages with low alcohol content. The 18th Amendment did not specify what qualified as intoxicating, leaving some room for interpretation. However, the Volstead Act, which provided the legal framework for enforcing prohibition, defined anything containing 0.5% alcohol by volume or more as illegal. This strict interpretation effectively shut down most breweries, including those that had planned to pivot to producing beer of moderate strength. The unintended consequences of this policy shift were wide-ranging, influencing both economic activity and cultural trends for years to come. Prohibition may have started with good intentions, but it quickly unraveled into one of the most paradoxical chapters in American history. It gave rise to bootleggers, speakeasies, jazz-fueled nightlife, and a wave of underground enterprise that reshaped the nation, while doing little to stop people from drinking. If you found these hidden truths about prohibition as fascinating as we do, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We're always uncorking the wildest stories from the American Old West. And trust us, there's plenty more where this came from.